everybody, Jason here from Murideo, and today I'm very excited and very proud to be presenting to you a product that we have been working on for well over a year, and that is the all-new 8K Murideo 6A and 6G. Thank you guys so much for coming to hang out today. We're going to cover some of the features of the 6A, 6G. I've got a few things here set up so we can do some hands-on demos. I see some familiar names in the attendee box here, so thanks guys, thanks for hanging out. I do have a question box here as well, guys. So as we go through the presentation, feel free to type those questions in. I'm flying solo today, so I'll do my best to answer those questions as we go along. But worst case scenario, we'll answer those questions at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and turn off my camera and we'll just stick with the PowerPoint for now. And let's get started. Okay, so again, like I said before, we're gonna be talking about the 8K Murideo 6A, 6G. Murideo in general, our whole mantra and our whole goal here is to make the latest in HDMI testing and calibration equipment, and of course tools for troubleshooting for the everyday integrator, for manufacturers, for calibrators, and for anybody who might be working in this AV world as a professional. Murideo started in about 2011. We started off in specializing in display calibration equipment. Our CEO, Jeff Murray, he's spent many years in the industry with several different companies such as Sencor. If you guys remember the old Sencor name, that was a company that used to make test equipment, and they don't anymore. So that's kind of where the whole idea of Murideo came about. Is there was a hole in the market for test equipment, so we decided to make it ourselves. And actually, it looks like there might be a question already. And oh, cool. Hey, Tom, how are you, man? Thank you so much for hanging out and joining us today. Great, excellent. So we have a little bit of, a lot of it, I should say, of HDMI test equipment and just AV test equipment in general, thanks to Jeff Murray's background. His son, Matt Murray, he's our CTO. Matt has just an amazing mind when it comes to how to make test equipment easy to use. And he just has a very good handle on what's going on in the market, which really helps us stay ahead of the game. We made our first 18 gigabit per second HDMI signal generator back in like 2012, 2013, something like that. And we were ahead of the curve, and we like that. Now we're looking at some of the 8K stuff, and just like back in the day when we were doing 4K stuff, people thought we were a little too early, but as it turns out, the 4K stuff moved very quickly. And we're kind of expecting the same thing with the 8K stuff. We're already starting to see some displays. We're already starting to see some AVRs that support 8K, and eventually we'll start seeing some sources and whatnot. So being ahead of the game is something that we're really proud of. We do have excellent engineers to help us do that, probably the best in the business. And like I said, our goal with the engineers is to just keep pushing those guys further and further so we can stay ahead of the market. My name is Jason Dussel. As I introduced myself before, I'm a trainer here from Murideo. I also teach the ISF classes that you may have attended in the past. If not, hopefully we'll see you at a future class as they start getting ramped up here pretty soon. I grew up in this industry as a lifelong enthusiast. My great-grandfather owned a TV radio repair shop when I was a kid, so getting to play with tubes and old TVs and things like that, just stuff that I was sort of grown up with. So I'm very lucky to be here. I feel very blessed to be working in an industry that I love. I've been calibrating TVs and displays and video systems for about 13 years now. I've also done a lot of work with HD-Base-T, got my CTS certification a couple years ago, 2017 Dealer Scope 40 under 40, which I'm really proud about. And if anybody is involved in what we used to refer to as the CTA and CEDIA R10 groups, these are working groups that come up with best practices for high quality installations and things like that. And I'm very happy to be a co-chair on that committee. We've got a lot of cool stuff coming for 2021 and into the future. So I mentioned before with Murideo, I do just want to cover a couple of quick things here in case you're new to the company. We make several different products that are used for testing and for calibrating displays and for testing HDMI systems and HDMI cables and whatnot. The 6G generator, we're going to be talking about that today. Also the 6A analyzer. These two products together can work together to do a lot of like end-to-end point-to-point troubleshooting, doing things like testing HDMI cables to make sure they're compliant for the bandwidth that's required for the system you're looking at. doing things like testing devices for CEC to make sure that's working properly. One thing that's really cool that we'll cover a little bit later is we're starting to be able to do some latency tests with the 6A and 6G. We'll cover that a little bit later. I'll give you a hands-on demo. We also have the Fox and Hound testing and troubleshooting kit. That's kind of like for your everyday integrator. It is a kit that comes with the generator and analyzer. That combo itself saves a ton of time in the field. We get a lot of compliments on it, and we get a lot of installers that reach out to us and say, hey, I was able to troubleshoot this system and get it up and running within a few minutes rather than spending hours and hours on the job site. We also have another product called the 7G. This is a product that's kind of our most powerful, our big boy, if you will, but that's a tool that's used by a lot of AV manufacturers and connectivity manufacturers. They're going to be doing things like testing eARC and ARC signals and whatnot. So for the whole spectrum of the things that we make, anything from the everyday integrator all the way up to engineers that might work for a major major electronics manufacturer. One thing we're really proud about, and we've had this kind of certification now for several years, but if you look up HDMI.org, they have a whole list of approved test equipment manufacturers, and we're very proud to say that we are on that list. Before we get too deep into it today, I do want to cover a couple of just very basic AV terms. In case you're new to this, there are some sort of correct ways to refer to these different devices. And as I go through the presentation, I'm going to be using some of this verbiage, so I want you guys to be totally clear on what I'm talking about when I say these things. So when we talk about a source, that's where the signal comes from. So you can think of a source as a cable box, a Blu-ray player, a media streaming device such as like an Apple TV, et cetera, et cetera. A repeater device is something that passes an HDMI signal, so something with an input and something with an output. Simple example of that would be a AVR, or audio video receiver, a matrix switch, any kind of HDMI extender, distribution amplifiers, which are also known as HDMI splitters, and different products like that. When I say the sync device, what I mean by that's the device on the end of the signal chain. So most likely 99.999% of the time, that's going to be a TV, projector, or a monitor. So just keep those terms in mind. Again, if you have questions throughout the presentation, trying to figure out what the heck I'm talking about, that's why the question box is there. Don't be shy. Go ahead and use it. Okay, so when we use this kit as a kit, meaning that we're going to be using the 6A and the 6G, just a couple of very cool things to point out about both of these products. We are supporting HDMI 2.1. We are able to send out and analyze 8K resolution and all those very high resolutions that we're dealing with today. We can also generate and analyze HDR, generate and analyze wide color gamut. Same with Dolby Vision, same with HLG. One thing that's really cool about the 6G, if you've used this product in the past, most people, the bulk of people who use the 6G alone, they're doing display and video and system calibration. The 6G will help you if you're using a third-party calibration software like CalMan or ColorSpace, and that really helps the calibration process speed along with doing a lot of the testing that you want to look at, grayscale, color gamut, things like that. A lot of that stuff's automated these days, so the 6G is a very popular generator in the calibration world. So a little bit more about the 6G. One thing that's really interesting about it, a lot of issues in AV systems, whether they're distributed or maybe it's just, a simple system where it's a source, an AVR, maybe a TV, maybe a sound bar. So whether the system itself is complicated or simple, the 6G is going to be able to test everything in that system to make sure it's compliant for not only HDMI 2.1 and 8K resolutions, and of course everything below 8K. We're also going to be able to test the system for compliance for HDR, Dolby Vision, those types of things. Another really cool feature of the 6G is we can read EDID. Why is that important? Well, when troubleshooting, EDID is one of the major reasons why systems fail. So a good example would be, you have a source that's, HDR, maybe 4K, maybe 8K, whatever the situation might be, and on the other end of that signal chain, maybe the incorrect signals coming through. So you're expecting 4K, it's really coming out 1080p. You're expecting 8K, it's really coming out 4K or 1080p. So we want to be able to take the generator and read the EDID of the display, or read the EDID of the repeater device that's in between the source and the display. So being able to just read the EDID really quick, taking a quick glance at the screen, and saying, okay, well, this display's EDID is asking for 1080p, but we want it to be 4K. So now we can start to investigate, why that TV is only asking for 1080p. And in most cases, there's some kind of switch you have to flip in the TV, whether it's deep color, enhanced color. Every manufacturer, of course, does it a little bit differently, but being able to read the EDID very quickly is a super helpful thing to do if you're doing some troubleshooting. Also, if you're a manufacturer or an engineer and you're building say a television, for example, and you want to make sure that it is asking for the correct EDID and all that stuff is in alignment for what you want that product to do. Again, being able to plug in, read the EDID very quickly and very easily is super important. This is ISF certified. As I said before, we're going to be using this generator a lot for video calibration. There are lots and lots of great test patterns from the ISF and from others, of course, that help you get that display tuned in so your customers can see shadows and good skin tones and correct grayscale and those types of things. So we talked a little bit about some of the major features of the 6G, a few other things in here that will just help you, especially during troubleshooting. We can select different color spaces, whether that's Rec 709 or wide color gamut with BT 2020 or Rec 2020. We can test for different bit depths. That's very important as we're going forward here. We've been dealing with an 8-bit system for many years now. With the introduction of HDR, we're now dealing with 10-bit, in some cases 12-bit. We are still dealing with 10-bit panels, but we do expect those panels to be 12-bit. And just to go a little bit above and beyond, we can even do 16-bit if needed. So if you're doing some testing and maybe the problem is that there's a lot of banding or maybe a lot of artifacts in the picture, we can change the bit depth of the generator from 8 to 10 and maybe see if that banding goes away. So being able to select that is super cool. Also with HDR, if you're trying to get HDR through a system and it's not going through for some reason, we can set the 6G to output an HDR signal and sort of force it through the system, and we can kind of take that information and try to figure out where the system is failing and what device might be causing it. Wide color gamut, I sort of mentioned before. Another big thing, I mentioned EDID once already, but another big thing when it comes to troubleshooting and system failures is HDCP. You have new products that are supporting HDCP 2.x. There may be old products in the system that are only supporting HDCP 1.x. More commonly, as you might see it, as HDCP 1.4. So the scenario might be you have an older AVR, you have a brand new source and a brand new TV, and you send a HDCP 2.x encryption through the system, and the TV on the other end is showing like a snowy picture. That's almost always going to be an HDCP issue. So I can take the generator, we can knock the HDCP version down to 1.4 and see if the signal is getting through. If it is, now we know that the AVR is really the culprit with that problem. And if you're doing, end-to-end troubleshooting, and maybe you're in a huge distributed system and you just want to check and make sure that video is getting through to the other side, you can even turn HDCP off, which is kind of cool. There's a nice light right on the front that will let you know that the hot plug is connected. So you know that something is plugged in and seeing something on the other end. I talked about ISF certified. We talked about EDID. If you are a manufacturer or you want to do a little bit more advanced testing, we have the API available for the 6G and the 6A. Feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to share it with you. We talked about CalMan and color space. Another good thing too about the generator and the analyzer is these things are battery operated. You can recharge them and use them, in most cases 4 to 6 hours before they need to be recharged again. Maybe if you're a calibrator, or maybe if you're an integrator or manufacturer, you might have some very specific test patterns that you like to use that maybe aren't included in the generator. You can upload your own custom test patterns to the 6G, which is super cool. Another thing about the 6G I really like, especially in this new HDR world, we have some HDR test patterns built in and some HDR reference images built in. So, if you are a calibrator or if you're just setting up a system, you can fire up some of these test patterns and reference images and just make sure that the image does look correct for your client. Another cool feature is the CEC ping test. If you're trying to determine whether a product has the CEC enabled or if it can do it at all, we can take the generator, we can connect it to a TV, for example. We can run a simple CEC ping test, and the TV will let us know. We'll let the generator know if the CEC is active or even there in the first place. So if we're going to do something simple like testing a sync device, maybe it's a television, it's probably what's going to be most of the time. It's a very simple connection. We have an HDMI output straight into the television, and one thing that we can do that's very simple to make sure that the system is compliant for the resolution and for frame rates and things like that you need. You can start off with the generator in a lower resolution. Maybe it's 720p. You can go as low as 480 if you'd like to, but you can start with a low resolution and keep working your way up until you get to that high bandwidth, either 4K or even 8K resolution, so you can start to determine what this TV can handle. Now, of course, if this is a brand new TV, it's probably going to be able to handle all the things, but you might be going into like a retrofit job where the TV is way up high, maybe it's on a ladder, maybe you can't see the back of it to get a model number to do a little bit of a Google search there. So, being able to just plug in, test the device's capabilities or test the TV's capabilities, you'll know very quickly what kind of resolutions that display can handle. Same thing with HDCP encryption. If I plug the generator into a television, I turn the HDCP off. Okay, great, we're getting a signal. Now I can try HDCP 1.x. Great, we get a signal. Now I test HDCP 2.x and there's no signal or a snowy screen. We know that that display cannot handle that HDCP encryption, so we have to start thinking about ways to fix that and to get around it. We still have a lot of clients out there who are doing 3D. It's not as popular as it once was, but even with the clients that I talk to when I do calibration work for them, there are still a lot of people out there who really love 3D, and there are a lot of 3D displays out there. So with the 6G, not only can you test for high bandwidth and 8K resolution, all the different versions of HDCP, but we can also generate some 3D images as well. Looks like there might be a question already, so let me go ahead and grab that really quick. Tom says, why is the 6G limited to 40 gigabits per second and not 48 gigabits per second? That is an excellent question, Tom, and we've heard that several times now from different customers and just from different people that have reached out to us about the whole 40 gigabit per second thing. One thing that we have to keep in mind is that over 40 gigabits per second, there are only 4 formats that are up to 48 gigabits per second, and these are usually 10K resolutions. And we don't have that yet. We probably won't have that for many, many years. A few of the TV manufacturers learned this right away. In 2019, there were some full HDMI 2.1 48 gigabit per second inputs on the TV, and they quickly realized that we were not utilizing that, and we probably won't for years. So just to keep the cost at a reasonable price for these products and to use those resources for other features and things like that, we are limited to 40 gigabits per second today, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to get to 48 gigabits per second in the future. But just keep in mind, for anything over 40 gigabits per second, there are only a small handful of formats that you need to go. Another question, Ladislav says, oh, hey, Ladislav, he's here all the time. Thanks so much for hanging out. He asks, why is the 6A and 6G use micro USB and not USB-C? Ladislav, great question. One thing to keep in mind, the data that's traveling between the 6A or 6G into your laptop to do certain tests and maybe use the software, we just don't need the speeds for USB-C. So for the 6A and 6G, it does come with a micro USB to regular USB, and you can connect to your laptop. You can look at things like software, and we'll take a quick look at the software a little bit later in the presentation. But great questions, guys. Keep them coming. So a simple test, as we looked at on the slide before, that's just a generator straight into a TV. It might get a little more complicated than that. If you're watching this webinar, it's most likely going to be more complicated to that, especially when we're doing distributed systems and extenders and whatnot. So all the things that we talked about on the previous slide, like being able to test a system for compliance for maybe 4K or 8K, making sure that all of the HDCP versions get through. You might have a system like this where, in the future, we'll have maybe an 8K source that could be going through HD-base-T transmitter into an HD-base-T receiver, and then into an AVR, and then to a display itself. So now I have to worry about if all of these repeater devices in between the source and display are able to pass all the things that we've talked about already. Again, resolutions, frame rates, HDCP versions, color space. Maybe we want to make sure deep color gets through. Maybe this customer still has a 3D TV. We want to make sure that the 3D signals are getting through. So you can have a simple setup where it's sourced straight into the TV, or of course you can have a more complicated setup where you're running through an entire signal chain. One thing about HDCP, we'll take a look at this in a little bit on a live demo, but HDCP, again, it's a big issue. One of the dead giveaways with HDCP problems is that you get a snowy screen. I've got an example of that I'll show you a little bit later. Or you have this image that flashes every 2 to 3 seconds. Those are 2 dead giveaways that there's an HDCP problem. So of course we want to be able to test the system for that kind of capability. A little bit about the analyzer. Of course, this is a 8K analyzer. We can see signals up to 8K resolution. We can put the 6A at the end of the signal chain if it's a complicated system, and we can see exactly what's going through. So the idea is we can set the generator to a specific resolution in a specific format, and then we can put the analyzer on the other end and make sure that what we want is actually making it through the system. Another cool thing about the 6A is you get a live video preview right there on the screen, so you can see exactly the video that's coming through. So not only are you able to see the data and all the vital information about the signal, excuse me, you do also get a live preview as well. If you want to make sure that audio is getting through the system, the 6A does have a VU meter to let you know audio is coming through which channels, and there's even a small headphone jack, a 3.5 millimeter jack on the 6A. So if you had a set of headphones and you want to actually hear the audio that's coming through, you can certainly do that as well. We can analyze all versions of HDCP, as I mentioned before. One thing that's different between the 6G and 6A, I mentioned before with the 6G, we can read an EDID from any device that has one, and that's useful information when doing things like troubleshooting. What's really cool about the 6A, because remember the 6A is in a lot of cases going to act like a TV or a sync device. So, maybe there's an EDID problem and you want to test EDID. There are some built-in common EDIDs to the 6A. So if you're having problems with the system and you think it's originating from the source, we can take the 6A, we can use one of the built-in EDIDs, one that you would expect that the display would have, and the 6A analyzer will now mimic a display that has that EDID, and now you can do further troubleshooting. Another really helpful feature is we can actually copy the EDID from that specific display. So maybe you're in a scenario where a rack of equipment is in one room, the display or the projector is in a completely different room. This stuff happens all the time. So if I'm trying to do a troubleshoot on this system and I'm not getting the right picture, I can very simply take the 6A analyzer, plug it into the display, read and capture the EDID. Now I can take that analyzer in my hands, and it might as well be that display or that projector. So now we can go back to the rack. We can plug the analyzer into the output of the rack and see exactly what's going on. Again, the signal might not be correct coming into the analyzer because it is emulating the display or the TV. Now you can take that analyzer and you can start going through the signal chain to figure out what's happening in between the source and display to not allow that display, or to not let that display ask for the correct EDID. In a lot of cases too, I sort of mentioned this before, when you're having EDID problems, a lot of times it's very common to overlook, and usually it's 3 or 4 menus deep into the display, but sometimes you do have to flip a switch for deep color or enhanced format. Maybe if it's a Sony, deep color if it's LG. A lot of different manufacturers out there do a lot of different things. So we can take the analyzer, we can copy EDID, and we can start troubleshooting in the rack. Another thing that's really cool, this is something that's always been a really, I'm going to quote unquote, fun issue to handle, is the client calls you up and they say, hey, every so often throughout the day, we lose picture for a second. We don't know why. We need to fix this. So great. Okay, so you take the kit out there, and of course, what happens, it's just like taking your car to a mechanic and it's making a noise, and you get to the mechanic and it's not making the noise anymore. This is the same thing that we see in the audio video world. So an integrator shows up to the client's house and the client says, yeah, the picture's flashing every so often. The integrator hangs out there for, who knows, half an hour, 2 hours even. They can hang out there as long as they want and the system doesn't fail. So now what are you gonna do? Here's what's really nice. You can take the 6A analyzer and you can use what we call a signal monitor test. And you can do this up to 90 days if you absolutely need to. But let's just use a simple example. Let's just say you're gonna leave it in overnight. So we can start the signal monitor test. It'll look at every single pixel. It'll look for picture dropouts, and it'll tell you in real time when these dropouts happen. So you can use that data now to try to figure out what might be causing these dropouts. And in a lot of cases, it could be something very common, like every time the AC kicks on, we lose picture. Maybe the cables up in the attic or whatnot are running too close to the air handler. Maybe the cables are ran over a kitchen where there's lots and lots of appliances, and it just happens to be every time the compressor for the refrigerator kicks on, we lose signal. So being able to monitor the system over time to see exactly when the dropouts are happening is very useful information for troubleshooting. So I mentioned before with the 6A, we're able to analyze up to 40 gigabits per second. That includes 8K, that includes 60 frames per second, depending on your combination there of frame rate, chroma, and bit depth. You can test for a lot of different things. We can test HDMI and DVI cables up to 40 gigabits per second, and that is also backwards compatible with everything up to 40 gigabits per second. So even going back to the quote unquote old version of HDMI with 2.0 and previous from that, that's those systems are still using TMDS, whereas we know with HDMI 2.1 they're using FRL. The point is you can test for everything. No big deal. You don't have to worry about if it can do this or do that. You can test for everything. Again, it's handheld, battery powered. You can copy and eat it from a display, walk back to a rack. No big deal. Again, a full charge on these should get you about 4 to 6 hours before it has to be charged again. I mentioned the signal monitor test, so you can analyze signals over time. And we can also look for HDR as well. So, maybe you're trying to test a system for HDR. You can take a quick look at the analyzer that's in place of the display. HDR is not getting through. Now we can figure out why. But the point is that we can take the analyzer and tell within seconds whether HDR or Dolby Vision or whatnot is getting through the system. We talked about being able to copy the EDID. We talked about HDR. Again, this is a very, very useful tool that will help you do any kind of troubleshooting with HDMI that you want to do in the field in a very simple way. So we talked a little bit about the first diagram that had the 6G in place of the source. Now we're going to look at the 6A in place of the display. So if I have, in this example, an 8K source or 4K source, whatever the case might be, I want to make sure that that signal is getting through the system all the way to the display. So in this case, I might take the analyzer, put it in place of the display, and try to see exactly what type of video format or video signal is making its way to the display. So the analyzer, again, there's a live screen right here. There's also a screen that you can actually see all of the vital information. We'll take a look at that here a little bit later when we do some hands-on stuff. So here's the cool thing. Let's say that you're not getting signal, the signal that you're expecting all the way to the TV. Now we can take the analyzer and we can bypass the AVR and put the analyzer right here after the HD-based T receiver. So now we're bypassing the AVR and we're reading the signal coming out of the HD-based T receiver. So again, we have an 8K source, it gets through the transmitter, it gets to the receiver, and it comes out 8K. So what does that tell us? If it comes out 8K here, but only 4K here, then we know that the AVR is the culprit in this case. We can also take it one step further. We can go from putting the analyzer in place of the display to putting the analyzer right after the HD-based T receiver, or putting the analyzer right after the source. Guys, this is a very common thing. If you have a high bandwidth source, whether it's 8K or 4K, a lot of things that we've seen in the past, and this was very, very apparent when we were doing 4K stuff, but you would set up a 4K Blu-ray player, for example, but by default from the factory, it's only outputting 1080p. Well, why? Well, the manufacturer doesn't know what you're plugging into, so they give you like what we'll call it a safe resolution that will work on most, if not all, displays. Not everybody has a 4K or an 8K TV. So there might be something as simple going on here as the source itself is not outputting the correct signal because we don't have it set up correctly. So what I like about this is I can put in, we'll just use 4K as an example. I can put a 4K 60 disc into the source. A good example, by the way, just a tech tip here, a pro tip. Gemini Man with Will Smith is 4K 60. So I can put a 4K 60 disc into the player, test the output. And if it's not 4K 60, I know that now that I need to go into the settings of the player and to figure out what's going on there. The other thing we have to take in consideration there too is the cable coming out. So we want to be able to test the source, see what's coming out of it. And we also want to test the cable to make sure that it can actually pass that high bandwidth signal into the HD-based T transmitter. So whether it's HDR or 8K resolution or specific version of HDCP, we can not only test the specific source or the specific repeater, but we want to do end-to-end troubleshooting from point to point. Now, if you take the 6A and 6G and use them together, not just one or the other, now we start to be able to do some really cool stuff. So as I mentioned a couple of times before, the generator can go in place of the source. We can crank it up to 4K or 8K, whatever we need for the system. We can put the analyzer in place of the display on the other end, and what's going in should be what's coming out. So again, full point-to-point testing here for the entire system. We also want to be able to test HDMI cables, and you can only do this with the combo. You can't do it with just the 6 or just the A. If you use them together, we can test cables for bandwidth for 18 gigabits per second or even higher than that. Another new feature of the 6A and 6G is an audio video latency test, and we'll look at that here in a moment. And then of course, HDCP and bandwidth, as we talked about before. So give me a moment here. I'm going to fire up my camera and we'll just look at a couple of these to see exactly what's going on here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the 6G and 6A. And the first thing that we'll do here is an HDMI cable test. And I've got a couple of cables here that we'll be able to actually test. So bear with me just a moment, and I'm going to take the 6G and we're going to use that as a source. So I'm going to plug in the HDMI cable that I want to test, and then we're going to use the other end of the cable, plug it directly into the 6A. And now I'm ready to do the cable test. So we're going to take the 6A and, excuse me one second, guys, let me do this. It'll be easier for us to all see. Okay, now we can take the 6A. Right now you're seeing the live preview screen. It looks like a color bar pattern is coming out of the G right now. I'm going to press the OK button, and there's the signal info. As I mentioned before, not only do we get a live preview, we also get the signal information. So as I scroll through the menu here, we're going to find one menu that's called Cable Test. Now, if you've used the old version of the 6A, 6G, this is no different as far as where it is in the menu, but there's a lot more options here now. So now we can test for 40 gigs, 32, and then 18, what we've been used to in the past, and then all the way down to 1 gig if needed. So I've got a cable plugged in right now, and I'm not sure its capabilities. So we're gonna highlight the 40 gigabits per second and press OK. Now we're gonna have to wait a few seconds here, but the generator and the analyzer are now talking to each other, and we're trying to figure out if this cable is compliant for 40 gigs. So it looks like so far the 5-volt pass, that's great. Now we're looking at the data channel, which is the FRL, and it looks like we have 0 errors, and the DDC channel passes and the hot plug passes. So that tells us that this cable that we're looking at right now is capable of passing at least 40 gigabits per second, which is great. The next thing we'll look at is the latency test. This is brand new. It's nothing that we've ever done before in the 6G, 6A. This is something that we've traditionally reserved for the 7, but we want to be able to test the latency between, maybe a source and a display. Maybe there's a few repeater devices in between the two, and we want to test the system latency. So what's new is there's a 3.5 millimeter connection on the top that says sync, S-Y-N-C. That's going to be both on the generator and on the analyzer, and that is a 3.5 millimeter connection. So we're going to take one of these, nothing special, just your everyday 3.5 millimeter cable. Everyone's seen those before, and we're going to plug into the sync port on the generator, and then we're going to plug into the sync port on the analyzer. So just to do a very basic thing here, we're going to connect the generator straight into the analyzer, and we're just going to test the latency between the two devices. And then I've got another piece down here that will run the signal through, and we'll figure out exactly what's going on with that product. So I'm going to go into the the analyzer menu, and we're going to scroll through. And you can trigger this, by the way, either at the generator or the analyzer. It's up to you. But we're going to scroll through the menu here, and we're going to find the sync test. Oh, I didn't pass it, did I? I'm looking at this upside down, guys, so just please bear with me for just a moment. Okay, actually, you know what? Let's just take a look at the generator. And I will do this facing up so I can find the right menu, and then we'll take a quick look. Okay, we're at the sync and latency test. I'm going to press OK, and we're going to see this in microseconds. So right now we're at 887 microseconds. That's pretty fast. Remember, guys, a microsecond is 1/1,000,000th of a second. So we're talking about 10 to the power of -6 for microseconds. We can see this at a very, very granular level. Okay, great. So the system latency between the source and the sync device, in this case the generator analyzer, is 887 microseconds. So now let's take another product, and this is going to be a switch, and we're going to see how much latency the switch might add to the system. So I'm going to take the output of the switch, plug in to the analyzer. We'll take the generator and plug that into the input of the switch. And then we'll do the same thing. So I'm going to scroll through the menu on the 6G. We're going to find the sync and latency test menu and press OK. Give it a few seconds. Ooh, a failure. I wonder why. Let's see. Let's just make sure here the switch is still turned on, and it is. And let's just do a quick hot plug. Make sure everything is synced up correctly. We are somehow getting a failure. Oh, you know what? I think it's something up with the switch. That's okay, guys. I don't want to keep you here for too long trying to troubleshoot this, but you kind of get the point. So if I had a matrix switch or an AVR, we can test the latency of that specific device. And if it's much higher, that might cause some lip sync errors. So now we can go back to maybe an AVR, or maybe the matrix switch does have an adjustment in it for latency. We can maybe take that adjustment and do what we have to do to stop any of those weird lip sync issues that we tend to see. Now we'll take a look real quick at an HDCP test. So let's take the generator and we're going to plug it straight into the analyzer. Now on the analyzer, I'm going to turn HDCP. We're going to turn HDCP so that it only will accept a 1.4 version of HDCP. Okay, great. Now we can take the generator and we can send out HDCP 2.2. And you guys will see what I sort of mentioned before. Actually, this is going to be HDCP 2.3. There's what a lot of people are doing at this point, especially within the HDMI community, the HDCP versions, so they don't get too confusing. We're starting to call them 1.x and 2.x. So right now I have the generator set up for HDCP 2.3. I have the analyzer set up for HDCP 1.4, and as you can see there, there's no signal. Now this could also be a snowy screen. We've seen that lots of times with HDCP, but the point is we can now test that system or just one specific device. Maybe it's a repeater device to make sure that it can pass the HDCP version that you need for the system. Okay, check the question box here, and I'm not seeing any questions so far. Okay, cool. All right, excellent. Let's move on. So here's a test diagram. I mentioned this before, we were talking about it, but this is a nice visual so you can actually see what's going on here. We've got the 6G in place of the source down here on one end, and we have the 6A in place of the display down on the other end. So, excuse me, here's how I would test this system. We're going to connect the output of the generator straight into the matrix switch, and we're going to plug the AV receiver straight into the analyzer. From there, we can take the generator and we can start pumping out whatever resolution, whatever frame rate, whatever version of chroma, whatever bit depth, whatever version of HDCP, whatever version of HDR, and we can now stress test the system to see what it can handle. So if you crank it up to, let's say 8K60, and you're not getting 8K60 on the other end, we know that something in between is not able to pass 8K and it's knocking it down to 4K. One new thing about HDMI 2.1 is something called link training. So the devices now are getting to a point where they're smart enough to say, oh, well, I can't handle that 8K signal, but I can handle 4K. So instead of you having to change something in the source, the two devices will talk to each other and say, hey, I tried to send you 8K, but it looks like you can only handle 4K. I'm going to go ahead and send that. And nowadays, this stuff is all sort of automated. And that's called link training if you want to take a look. We actually did a great webinar yesterday with Jeff Boccaccio from DPL Labs, and he went more pretty well in depth into how link training works. But again, the point here, guys, is that if I send 8K in, I want 8K to come out. And if it's not, now we can start taking, there's two ways you can do this. You can start taking the generator and bypassing maybe the switch or maybe the extender or maybe the receiver and work your way up, or you can take the analyzer, put it in place of the display, maybe put it after the extender, maybe put it after the matrix switch, or maybe put it right after the source. So whether you use the generator to work your way up or you use the analyzer to work your way down, or you're doing full system point-to-point troubleshooting, this is a great reason why you'd want to have the G and the A, of course, with the full kit. Now you can get the G and A separately, of course, but you know, in a lot of cases, we have a lot of folks out there who calibrate displays, so they just go with the 6G. Maybe they're doing some troubleshooting as they're calibrating. That happens a lot, especially with these new high bandwidth systems. They might add the A to their arsenal a little bit later, and that's okay. In most cases, though, people do buy the full kit so they can get going right away with testing cables and testing systems and whatnot. So, guys, that is all I have for you as far as PowerPoint goes. Let me jump into the question box here and see what kind of questions you guys have. Ooh, very good question from Tom, and I'm so glad you asked this. I can't believe I haven't mentioned this so far. So if you currently have a 4K version of the 6G and the 6A, you can absolutely trade those in. We have a nice trade-in program right now. And you know, the nice thing is about our trade-in program, we're being very generous with it. Even if you have a broken USB port or maybe a cracked screen, or maybe the battery doesn't charge anymore, you know, maybe the case has a big crack in it. We want you guys to get these new products in your hands, so we can absolutely take your 4K generator in as a trade towards the 8K. Excellent question. Let's see what else is in here. Tom, another great question from Tom. Did you upgrade the casing and the buttons? Absolutely. We did a little bit of refinement to the buttons. You'll notice now that you don't have to press them so hard. One thing I am noticing so far is you do have to hold the power button on each one just a smidge longer than you used to have to. We also changed the color of the buttons to make it a little less, a little more kind of sleek looking, if you will, a little more modern looking. But yes, we absolutely upgraded. We upgraded the USB port. We upgraded the power supply. We upgraded the buttons. And probably even maybe a couple other things I'm not thinking of right now, but absolutely, Tom, thank you for the question. Another question comes in, is the 7G also limited to 40 gigabits per second? Yes, for the same reason we talked about before. We didn't want to have to use 48 gigabit per second chips in either one of these products. Otherwise, the 7G would have been $10,000+. And the fact that we're not even near 48 gigabits per second yet, that was just a decision that we had to make as a company. Do we make an affordable product now that most people are going to be able to take full advantage of, or do we make a very expensive product right now where most people, in fact almost nobody right now, is going to be using anything over 40 gigs? So 48 gigs definitely in the future. We have plans for it, of course, but as of right now, we're going to stick with 40 gigabits per second. Ladislav says, is there a little more memory for custom pictures? No, Ladislav, there's not more memory for custom pictures, but depending on the resolution, you might be able to fit more or less, you know, depending on what you're looking at. So for example, if you want to do a lower resolution test pattern, that was for something like contrast, that doesn't need to be a full 1080p or even a 4K test pattern, you can certainly do that if you'd like to. The new 6G, another question that comes in, retail on it, if you're not trading something in, is $29.95 on the 6G. Another thing I wanted to point out too, because I've gotten this question already, and it just came to my mind. When you do get the 6G and 6A, whether it's the 4K version or the 8K version, a lot of people have rang us up and said, hey, the screen's all scratched up. You know, I don't know if I want to keep this. There actually is a screen protector on there, just like if you buy a new cell phone or a new camera, there is a screen protector on there from the factory, so you don't have to worry about scratches during shipping or anything like that. So go ahead and make sure to turn that, to peel that sticker off. In some cases, you might want to leave the sticker on. If you're getting a lot of use out of these tools in the field and you're tossing them into your backpack and whatnot, you don't want to scratch that screen, so maybe you leave the screen protector on, and that's okay. We've even had some people in the past get really creative, and they'll modify one of those really heavy duty screen protectors that you might look at getting for a smartphone, and they'll modify it size wise to fit over the LCD screen on the 6A and 6G, just for a little bit more of added protection. Another question comes in, can I install my own test patterns in the 6G 8K? Absolutely, very similar to Ladislav's question before. You can upload your own custom test patterns. And guys, I do this. You know, there's a few test patterns that I really like to use for certain things, like checking for banding. There's a couple of really good test patterns already built in, such as the chroma multiburst pattern. That'll give you a little bit of more of an idea of what's going on with your chroma. You can set it to RGB, you can set it to YCBCR, whether it's 420, 422 or 444. And the chroma multiburst will tell you a lot about what's going on with the chroma, but also with the bit depth. You know, if I want to use a specific screenshot for bit depth, I can certainly upload that as well. And going back to the chroma thing that I mentioned before, we do have the chroma multiburst pattern built in. I have a pattern that I like to use on top of that, which is, you guys may have seen this before, but there's some text on the screen, and it's the same sentence. The quick brown fox jumped over the, I forget it off the top of my head right now, but you guys will remember that from probably typing class. I think that's where that came from. But anyway, so it has those words across the screen in different colors, so you can look at the chroma in text versus looking at it in a chroma multiburst pattern. So I've uploaded that custom test pattern. I've also uploaded another pattern I like to use for banding that just shows multiple different colors, and it's really easy to see if there's any banding in the image. So absolutely, Tom, you can upload your own custom test patterns. Another question comes in: when will CalMan support 6G 8K? We are in communication with them right now to get that up and running. One thing that we are recommending is that if you are doing a trade-in, we are letting you keep the 4K version if you're calibrating and you need to connect to CalMan. And once the CalMan is supporting the 8K version of the 6G, you can wait till then to send us the 4K that you traded in. So we can get the 8K one to you so you can start using it, and you can keep the 4K one until the CalMan support is there. And they've told us that they're looking at July, maybe early August at the absolute latest. So if you have to hold on to that 4K version before you trade it in for a little bit longer, maybe a month or 6 weeks or so, no problem. We have no problems with you guys doing that. Let's see if there's any more questions. And guys, I don't see any more questions, and we're right at 45 minutes. I managed to not go over an hour. So thank you guys so much for hanging out. I'm happy to hang out a little bit longer if you guys want to pipe in some more questions, but I don't really have anything else for you. Our email address is info@murideo.com. If you do have any specific questions, we do have a 24/7 chat capability on our website. So maybe if you don't live in the US, or maybe you're somewhere where we're way far off on time differences and you need to answer right away, go ahead and send us something in the chat. That goes directly to my phone and a couple of my coworkers' phones, and we can usually get those answered right away for you. Any other questions that you guys might have, info@murideo.com. We're also working on right now building some of our forums. So if different integrators have different methods of doing things like troubleshooting, or there's some different methods of calibration, for example, we do have some things up on the forums now, and we're really hoping to build that community up in the future. I mentioned the trade-ins. That's going to be something that a lot of you might take advantage of, especially if you have the old 4K version. But other than that, guys, I don't have anything else for you. So if you don't have anything else for me, I'll cut you loose for the day. Thank you for hanging out for this nearly hour, and I hope you guys have an excellent weekend. And don't be shy. Feel free, reach out, ask me any question that you'd like. And one other thing too, if you want to check out that webinar we did yesterday with Jeff Boccaccio from DPL Labs, where we talk way more in depth about HDMI 2.1 and link training and those types of things, that's already up on our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is really growing very, very rapidly right now. We've gone from 400 subscribers to almost 1,000 in just a few months. And a lot of that is because of you guys. You're emailing us with great topics to cover. And some people, for example, somebody wanted specifically to see how a Sony TV is calibrated manually. So we went ahead and did a session on that. So I am 1,000,000% open to take suggestions from you guys to do any type of webinar that you might like involving troubleshooting, any of the equipment, any of the tests that the equipment can do. I really would love to hear from you guys. Leave those things in the comment section if you have something specific that you want us to make a video on. We also have a couple of live environment videos, which are really cool. I love doing those. So we have some live environment videos where I'm actually at somebody's house calibrating a TV, or I'm actually in a real system, in a real environment, testing things like HD-base-T. So again, guys, feel free. Anything that you want to know, anything you want to learn, I'm happy to help. With that being said, don't see any other questions. Thank you guys so much. Again, have an excellent weekend, and we will see you next time.